this is another encounter, and we are going to talk to, I am going to talk to Professor Colin Biggs, who has been at John Cabot since 2009 in the business department, teaches international business and, what was the other one? The other business, other things, other businesses. He's going to talk to us about artificial intelligence, and obviously, I mean, actually those are very closely connected, but I'm going to ask Colin why he knows anything about artificial intelligence and what it is that he can tell us about it.
Okay, very, very happy to try and do that. Can I just say to begin with that this is part of a series, it's part of something that you're trying to do, which is to explore in an interdisciplinary way the work which you do and set that in a wider context. And I just want to say to begin with, I think this is a fantastic idea. I totally support the idea of looking interdisciplinarily at academia, so I'm thrilled to be here. So
well, thank you. You can definitely say that. I'm very happy to hear it.
Okay, so why am I not a total imposter coming along as a business professor and a international management consultant and talking about artificial intelligence? And I guess the story is that in a former life, many years ago, I was doing a PhD, and the PhD had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with business. It had to do with linguistics, theoretical linguistics, and in particular with trying to develop an account of formal semantics for natural languages. I was doing that at Cambridge, and at the time, eons ago, there were a whole pile of people who were starting to get interested in something which they called artificial intelligence. And I, as a young researcher, got involved in a group, an interdisciplinary group, of course, of people, including people from the computer lab in Cambridge, people from psychology, people from the philosophy department, and we all got together, a group of about 20 of us on a regular basis, and we talked about the world and artificial intelligence and the prospects for artificial intelligence. I then went on to actually do artificial intelligence and to build a couple of expert systems, as they were called.
Okay, so sorry, by doing artificial intelligence, you actually mean working in the field. So programming or coding, or what is it?
Getting somebody to program for me.
Yes, but I mean thinking of what the program should do.
Absolutely, yeah.
And how the system should acquire information.
Absolutely. Okay. And I'm glad you're probing this, because in fact what was certainly the case then was that artificial intelligence was all about trying to build artificial intelligence into an artificial device and really try and put into that device the kinds of stuff which humans already knew. Let me give you an example of the kind of thing that I was doing. So because I was coming at this from the point of view of linguistics, what I was doing was looking at an aspect of linguistics, namely morphology. And morphology, amongst other things, I'll illustrate it from that. Morphology is a study of the way in which words are made up from meaningful parts. So we, as speakers of English, know that if you take the word cat, then you can stick an S on that, and it means you've got more than one cat. You can also have words like catwalk, which
caterpillar.
I'm not sure about the caterpillar.
I know, I'm being annoying.
All right, but catwalk, yes. You can recognize that the same cat bit with the same meaning occurs in cat and cats and catwalk. Maybe not caterpillar. We also know, because this is part of what we know about language, that if you take a word like Catalyst, the cat in Catalyst isn't
somewhere else.
So we know how to take complex words and break them down into morphemes, and that's the basis of morphology. So the way that the team I was working in tackle this is to get some programmers and to basically start to build up an artificial device, an artificial intelligence, and to build into that artificial intelligence the stuff which we as humans knew, and that came to be known at the time as an expert system, which is a slightly odd expression really, because we're talking about something not really expert.
Not expert,
but
potential. It was an aspiration. It will become expert.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you another question just because I have a mission to interrupt you periodically.
Good.
But so the assumption, I imagine, was to, I'm seriously imagining, so you have to tell me if I'm imagining correctly or not, to understand whether, to the extent to which machines could imitate or could acquire knowledge in the way humans did, so, or was it did it have any? Let's put it like this: why would they start with language? Why would it be important for the machine to be able to use language, to start with? Why couldn't they, for instance, have packed the machine with images and seen how they interacted with that, or music, or maths, which in fact it was based on?
Okay, great. So in fact, at that time, and this is very much relatively early days in artificial intelligence, there were different teams of people working on different aspects of making machines intelligent. Because of my background at the time, what I did was to try to replicate aspects of human knowledge about language into a machine, and I did that in part because the people I was working with, including IBM UK Scientific Centre, wanted more insight into that and wanted to be able to build artificial devices which could, for example, get involved in speech to text or text to speech systems, and you can't get that to work properly unless you understand morphology. So there was a personal reason, and there was also a very practical and ultimately commercial reason why we were looking at that. Other people were certainly looking at other aspects of building artificial devices which could recognize patterns, could recognize sounds, independent of language and so on. So that's why we...
And so, no, because what I was thinking was that if a machine that understands the language, that can operate as you are going to tell us, they did succeed at one point later on in your story in developing these text to speech, voice to text and text to voice devices. That is a language, that is a machine that not only understands, but it's a machine with whom humans can interact in a different way than, pattern recognition or even sound recognition that is not linguistic. So for me, that is interesting in the development of artificial intelligence in its story element, because of course a machine that can speak to you or can understand you as you speak is a completely different from a human level from a machine that operates on its own system. So it's communicating to you in your own system as opposed to...
Indeed, yeah. And that gives us all the more reason to start to think of these machines as being almost, as it were, human. And there seems to be, particularly in the early days of artificial intelligence, particularly in fact when people came up with the phrase artificial intelligence, they were quite clearly had a narrative there in their heads around the idea that this was sort of intelligence, but not as we know it. It was kind of the best we can do in trying to imitate it. I don't actually like the term artificial intelligence as a way of fleshing out the acronym AI. I prefer something like alternative intelligence, because I think the focus on AI as being artificial intelligence has meant that we've for a long time, particularly when I was first active in the field, what we were trying to do is to make machines which replicated how we thought that we went about doing things. And what we're seeing now, which is really powerful and really interesting, is machines which are learning how to think, perhaps, we can come back on that, but at least how to learn, and how to learn in ways which are not constrained by what information we put into them. So the early days, sort of project I worked on with IBM was very much about the machine is only as good as the inputs, and what you have to do is put everything that you know into a machine, and then it will know as much as you know because you made that. So what we're starting to see now, which is very exciting and very promising, and also for some threatening about artificial intelligence, is that we're getting devices which are able to learn, and to learn in generalized ways, which mean that they can come up with things not because you put them into the machine and the machine has finally managed to get out what you've put in, but rather that it's gone beyond that. And that, I think, is the exciting part about contemporary artificial intelligence. I no longer actively do AI, but I am an extremely close watcher of contemporary AI, and indeed trying to interpret that in various things which I do. And I think this is a very, very exciting period, but also one that worries a lot of people.
Yes, and I think at this point, the question of whether artificial intelligence, or if you want, we can call it alternative intelligence for the sake of this conversation. The fact that worries people about artificial intelligence is exactly in the humanity of the machine. And so even though I would assume, beyond the hyped fears and things that are, more belong largely in avowed fiction, in open fiction, or sometimes in science fiction has done its bit, but in science fiction, usually in my experience of science fiction, at least, if it is any good, it is usually very sympathetic to the artificial intelligence, exactly because the artificial intelligence is seen as a creature, as something that was created, and so the responsibility of whatever the creature does lies heavily with the human that has created it. So if it is a murderous machine, then the responsibility for them, and in what we're seeing now about all these algorithms and Facebook and so on, and whether they're controlling us or not controlling us, and the way they can, obviously a learning algorithm, if that makes any sense, that can not only acquire information but also use it for nefarious purposes, that would posit an autonomous machine. And we're not talking about autonomous machines. That A does not stand for autonomous. It might stand for artificial or for alternative, but it certainly doesn't. And until that is the case, we're still talking about tools. But I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression of why people are so worried about, humans have always been worried about the tools they've created and whether they've overstretched the mark and what are these tools going to do to them. And tools change human beings, which to me is the most fascinating thing. So in using tools, they change themselves. Sure. So there is a dynamic there. But I think what really scares us about artificial intelligence is the fact that we started, as you're telling us, to program them as if they were thinking of them as machines. So thinking, okay, they need to learn how to speak, so we have to program them with the rules of grammar. Or they they need to learn how to play chess, and we put the rules of chess. And instead, that didn't work. And what you're telling us that they've found now is that what does work is that they learn like we learn. via try and error. So you don't have to give them everything in advance. You have to make them experience things, and at that point they learn in the same way as humans learn. I read a fascinating article about someone who abandoned this. I can't remember the details, but it was about somebody who had decided that he wanted to study the way artificial intelligence might really learn like a child by pretending that he lived with this little robot that he'd created, a bot thing, as if it were his child. And then he actually had a child and gave up on the experiment. And it didn't move too fast, actually. It was a little too systematic for the bot, right? So it didn't get enough of the concentrated attention that it needed, apparently. But I think that is what is scary. The way in which we might have created a tool that is really very similar to us. And so the fear is reflexive. Might it be as horrible as human beings are?
Okay.
A few questions for you there.
Just a couple of dozen, I think.
Yeah.
Let me try and pick up on some of those. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right that one of the striking things, I was involved in doing AI, centrally involved in AI for a period of 6, 7, 8 years, and the progress which not only I but other people made in artificial intelligence during that period now looks pathetically slow, right? Because, for example, if you've got to teach a machine all the rules of language, that's a huge challenge. There's an awful amount of material. You've got to get it all coded up, you've got to get it to work, you've got to test it and so on. Incredibly slow process. Similarly, with early attempts to introduce machine translation between languages. What we've seen in the last 10 years, last 5 years in particular, is a totally different approach to artificial intelligence, which in some ways, I think we at least post hoc trying to rationalize this can see perhaps replicate some human elements in the way we go about doing some of this. And that has simultaneously meant that artificial intelligence has produced results with an alarming speed compared with what was happening before, and a very pleasing speed from many points of view. But it's also made a lot of people, therefore, very nervous. So you get this polarity. So a couple of weeks ago, at a town hall event in San Francisco, you had the CEO of Google saying that probably artificial intelligence will surpass fire and electricity as shapers of humankind and humanity, which is, a pretty strong statement. But then if you come at it from the perspective of Google, you might want to believe that. I actually think that there's a great deal of evidence, maybe there's some hyperbole there, but actually artificial intelligence can indeed make an enormous difference. At the same time, you've got other people, people who are very much associated with technology and with being innovative, like Elon Musk, who's certainly not somebody whom we would think of as being shy about technology, saying that artificial intelligence is more dangerous than North Korea, which seems to be bringing in a different element, but clearly indicates that he
definitely mixing his metaphors.
Indeed. And Stephen Hawking, who died a few weeks ago, was also on record as saying that possibly, hedging his bets a little bit more, possibly artificial intelligence will emerge as being a serious mistake for mankind. I think when people say this, what they're worried about is that not that we will build a machine that, following on from literature is then going to be a monster creation which we created and we have to live with the consequences of it. And there's a
very long tradition of that.
Of that in literature, but rather that I do think that as we create machines which are more capable of generalized learning, and we can come back on that we will be producing more and more powerful machines, and the people who have access to these machines may well use these machines in ways which are not for the benefit of mankind, but perhaps certainly for the benefit of global cybercrime, which is one of the fastest growing businesses on this planet. So there are very scary things there, but they're not scary things about creating a monster that we can no longer control, rather that
helping people to do things
that we would
in a more effective, yes, that we would rather they didn't in a more effective way.
Yeah.
Well, that's usually what tools do. I mean, I would have put amongst, between fire and electricity, I would have put press, printing.
Okay.
Because printing, and so the possibility for people to write their thoughts, their political thoughts, their religious thoughts, and to share them and to keep them permanently radically changes everything. And that is really a tool that affects the way humans think. And it is also a tool that affects the way human thinks about hierarchies. And so the powerful people after the invention of the press are the ones who are in control of the press. So the ones who decide who gets printed and who doesn't get printed. That is the place of power after that, right? And so obviously you have censorship, which doesn't really work very well, but it exists exactly to control that power. And I think what is most fascinating in the whole technological development of recent years, and internet at the beginning was hailed as this place which was going to affect this revolution of returning the possibility of self-expression to everybody who couldn't access self. And then now we're all haunted by ideas of fake news and things like that, and nobody can control, nobody has authority anymore, and so on. And I think that story is similar, and I obviously think in terms of stories, but is similar to what is scary about artificial intelligence. So what people are afraid of, even people who are not in power, then they're afraid not of human beings retaining power. And so they wouldn't be afraid of a machine that is going to maybe allow nefarious human beings to be more nefarious. They're afraid of a machine that can compete with humanity. So against all evidence that human beings are quite sufficient unto themselves as enemies, they are afraid of a new antagonist. And what is that? Why is that antagonist scary? Because it thinks, I've got another alternative for AI, antagonist intelligence, because it thinks like human beings, but it is much faster, has a lot more information at its whatever ends, not fingertips in this case, and so consequently can beat the most intelligent human being. And to conclude my story, why is that scary? Because that is the place where ever since at least Descartes we have said, why should we be in control of the world? Because we are intelligent.
Okay.
Right? And so if there's something else that is more intelligent than us, it follows from our pattern of thinking that they must be in control.
Okay. All right.
I don't know.
And then that's really scary. Yeah.
And then that's really scary. And so I think, but obviously having worked in artificial intelligence and having experience of it, I would imagine that idea wouldn't even have occurred to anyone. I mean, that's not certainly what you were planning to do.
Certainly not what I was planning to do, or anybody else that I worked with. I think let's sort of look at how AI has moved on and do that, because I think it's directly relevant to some of these issues, because it shows you how AI has moved beyond you only get out what you've put in, but it also shows the limits to what you can get out given what you've put in and given the capabilities of the intelligence which you've created. A nice example of this would be around competitive games which require high levels of intelligence, like chess and also the Oriental game Go. These games require that you know the rules, but they also require that you know the tactics, you know the end games, you know all the kinds of things which you should and shouldn't do. If you're going to be really good at chess, then you need to know all the kind of clever things which have gone on in endless games in the past. Huge amount of information.
Yeah.
All right. It was long ago demonstrated that if you, by IBM, that if you get a computer with enough memory, you can put huge amounts of information about every conceivable chess game that was ever played, how it was resolved. You obviously put the rules of chess into this, and you can then get this device to be smarter than the reigning world chess champion. Okay, especially because you've also got immense computing capability that can work, like in nanoseconds. Okay. That's one thing. What's now happened with chess is something completely different. Okay, and this brings us on to a development over the last few years around something called DeepMind, which clearly again is
a well-chosen term.
Narrative connotations. DeepMind is born out of work done at University College London, so move down 60 miles south of Cambridge. But actually the people who have worked on that, at least one of the leaders of that originally himself, started at the computer lab in Cambridge. This work has taken chess playing to a whole different level. So the DeepMind team, which has now been acquired by Google Alphabet, this team built a capability in an artificial device to get very good at doing playing chess games, and then they brought out a new machine which was able to learn in a much more generalized way, and they were able to get this machine starting with 0 inputs, no rules of the game about chess, no, here are 25,000 opening gambits, which are really good if you want to win. And in one day, 24 hours, this machine got to the point where it could play chess and it could beat not humans, but the best available chess playing artificial devices up to that point. Okay.
Who had already beaten humans.
Yes.
So they were better than the ones who beat humans.
Okay. Okay. And this in a space of 24 hours. Now, clearly, to do that without all of that rich input, you've got to have some very clever stuff in there about getting this machine to quote unquote learn, right?
Right.
And that is an enormous change, okay? Because what it means is that you can now get devices which are capable of generalizing from the start to learn things, they start to try things out in the way that humans do, and they explore where that gets them, they realize that things aren't working, they backtrack, they try something else, and over a space of 24 hours, which for a machine can be, as it were, a very long time because it can do a fantastic amount in that period, it can then learn unlearn, relearn, and generalize learning patterns and actually get to the point where it can win at chess. What that means is that we've got devices now which are capable of the type of learning which humans are capable of, where namely we can learn how to do something, and then having learned how to do that, we know how to do something else because we can extract some general learning principles and some tricks and so on, and we are able to build those into. It looks now as if we've got artificial intelligence devices which can do just that. That, for me, is a tremendous leap forward. However, at the moment, there is still a huge difference between machines and humans, because what we don't at the moment have, but I see no reason why this should not come in even within a time frame like 5 years, 10 years, because DeepMind, for example, didn't exist 10 years ago, right? Okay, and now we have generalized learning. What we don't have at the moment is a device which can get very good at chess in 24 hours and can then say, now what should I look at next, right? And I'm going to crack this, and I'm going to crack this. Some other games, yes, but then let me get my head around how you run an airline and make sure that the flight patterns work and the planes are where they're supposed to be, or some other pretty important but highly complex problem for business. So we don't have machines which have that degree of spontaneous learning, right?
Yes.
And that seems to me to be a crucial point, and frankly one which is not just a matter of time before that disappears. I think
that's structural?
I think that well, again, I'm slightly...
We won't quote you on that.
No, I'm slightly hesitant simply because a few years ago nobody would have thought
I understand, but you're suggesting...
But
I mean,
that
obviously,
seems to me to be a kind...
It's a real game changer if you get machines that can skip from one category of thought to another.
And that I suspect is at least a fundamental block, but maybe is actually something which will turn out to be a permanent barrier. If it is a permanent barrier, then that's one way in which ultimately AI is going to never ever pose the kind of
threat that is imagined. So there are two texts, neither of which are literary, in the sense that they're not literature, but they are film, which both let's say, reflect this fear, this narrative of the artificial intelligence and the threats it poses to humanity. One of them is Stanley Kubrick's film, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the other is I would say a riposte to it. It's an answer to it, and it is the digital animated film, Pixar film called Wall-E. And the HAL, which I don't know if it's the case or not, but I read repeated, is a take on IBM, using the letters that follow in the alphabet, or in fact that precede in the alphabet, because HAL, IBM, yes, is this central intelligence on the spaceship that not only behaves like a human being, and but actually develops a kind of existential angst that leads it finally to behave like a human being, and as the film posits, the central thing that human beings do is kill. Kill with no no other reason, no biological reason, not for food, not for sex, not for anything like that, but just kill because they can and assert their power in that way. And so the moment in which the machine starts doing that, that is the moment when you have to turn the machine off. the fascinating answer in 2008. So I think 2001: A Space Odyssey is 1968, because I remember it was the year before the moon. And in 2008, Pixar makes this film, Wall-E, which is about a little robot that has been left in a post-apocalyptic world, which has been overrun by rubbish. And this little robot has been left on the Earth to clean it up, amongst, lots of robots have been left on the Earth to clean it up, so that whilst humanity is trepsing around in a spaceship called the Axiom. So whilst the humans are busy devolving on the spaceship, because they don't move, they don't do anything, they stop thinking and so on, and they get... Wall-E on Earth learns how to self-power, so he learns how to... he mends himself, he looks after himself, and then he gradually, over 700 years, learns, starts studying humanity from their rubbish.
Okay.
And then he saves humanity. So, long story short, he gets, by various different ways, he gets to the spaceship, reminds humanity by his acts of courage and love what a wonderful thing it is to be human in the best possible sense of the world, brings them all back to the Earth, and a new utopic future of machines and human beings living together, and neither is superior to the other. So it's not one is the tool and one is the agent, but they are mutually useful to each other. They share the same kind of feelings, but they don't hurt each other. And the bad machine that exists, but is not very strong in the narrative, is really only doing it because she's following orders. It was what she's been told to do, right? So it wasn't her fault. So this is like a happy fable of artificial intelligence, and I think it's fascinating that there are happy fables of artificial intelligence. So it's not all about we're going to die and machines are going to take over, but that there are happy narratives, and that those narratives might be those are made by people who use computers to make art. So they're the ones who are familiar with what computers of a very sophisticated kind can do, and so they present them in a positive way. I'm wondering if that that is what we are lacking now, that we only have the negative side of artificial intelligence. Facebook is prying into your life. The algorithm of Google is searching in your brain. That device that you were telling me about, the one that tell us about that a minute.
Okay, so we're talking about alter ego.
Yeah.
This is not actually Google, although Google are certainly interested in this area as well. This is the MIT Media Lab, who have already developed a device which sits on your chin, and basically it's able to pick up the neuromuscular sensations which come before you speak, right? So it can, at a pre-vocalization stage, pick up what's going on, which would uninterrupted result in your speaking without your having to actually speak. And you may well ask, well, why would anyone want to do that? One kind of slightly localized example of this would be that if you were trying to talk on a mobile phone in a very noisy environment with lots and lots of background noise, printing press, blast furnace, whatever, then you could actually talk onto your mobile phone without talking. And without any background disturbance. Okay. Equally, you could talk to your virtual personal assistant and get your personal assistant to do all sorts of things without actually having to talk. This at the moment looks a little bit gimmicky to a lot of people, but it does in fact have the potential to have an enormous number of very, very practical examples. But let's go back to your fascinating discussion, if we've got a minute.
Yeah,
time?
Yes.
About the use of artificial intelligence as a way of creating real drama, real theatre in movies. Yes, Pixar, of course, has a lot of people inside it who know a thing or two about technology and know a lot about artificial intelligence. I don't think that means that they wanted to make a movie which would somehow show artificial intelligence in a good light, in a human light. I think they figured out that precisely they went back to the starting point for this discussion, which we're having, namely that most of us somehow want to think of machines as somehow, in some respects, like us, and exploring the idea that they might be a whole lot more like us than, in fact, I would submit they are. Is good theatre.
Yes.
So much so that I believe next week we're going to have a rerun of the original Stanley Kubrick is coming out in, I think, 7 days' time. So clearly somebody thinks there's a winning formula here, and we all want to see, explore the idea that maybe these devices can have all sorts of experiences beyond being very good at generalized problem solving, and we're talking about a movie where people have emotions and fall into relationships, all sorts of stuff like that, and these people are machines. That's great theatre. I don't
see it.
buy it as something that is, come back in 5 years' time and I'll tell you all about it.
Right.
I don't think so. No.
Well, thank you. That's fascinating. I mean, we have to stop, but I think we could have actually gone on for a long time more. Maybe we'll do it another time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.